the meeting now. So
Oh, recording in
thanks,
progress.
everyone.
Thanks, Ivan.
Bye.
See you. Okay. Is everybody okay for recording this? Yeah. Okay. Amazing. So I just popped that thought prompt in the chat about what surprised you, what did you learn, what bubbled up in conversation, and then what's still percolating. You can choose one or all of those as a thought prompt for you going in. Ivan, so generous to share that the facilitation was helpful, the preparation was good, and then the quality of conversations was high, and that there were real action items, but also preliminary conversations around COVID and what we're still processing, and maybe what we haven't spent enough time really rumbling on before we get into, that what the action items are of governance. So I think those are all really salient points and so helpful for us across the sector, right? Like what are we still grappling with? What have we inherited? And then how do we move forward? Yeah, amazing. Who wants to go next? One or any of those thought prompts in the chat. Emily, yeah.
Thank you so much. Sorry I was a bit late. I had another meeting that ended a few minutes late. But luckily for Zoom, I could just hop on over here. It's pretty easy. Um, I enjoyed the retreat. It was my first time ever being a part of something like that. I agree with Ivan. I liked the informal lunch aspect. I think maybe if we were to do that informal lunch again, which I think is a good idea, maybe having it where we could also be um, walking around with like other groups as well, because it was a long time sitting in my chair with the same group of people. But yeah, I thought the preparation was really well done. I liked having the four Zoom sessions spread out. And I also really liked how you and Sophia sent out the like kind of recap minutes, because obviously being here, you can remember stuff, but it's hard to remember for like over a month. So I enjoyed how you guys like summed it up really well and gave us also really helpful was the one pager, like the prompt you gave us like at the table. Um, I my group was good. It was a good group of people to have a conversation with. Um, think maybe the having I don't know how to say this, but with the Dean recorder, I think maybe next time having some way that they could be maybe incorporated in some way, because at certain points um, like it felt a bit more like they would um, take it on a bit. So I was just a bit confused on the roles there. So that's maybe just something maybe we could have like a meeting, one meeting all together or something that might be helpful. But overall, I thought it was really well done. I also thought your keynote was um, very applicable and interesting, and everyone at my table was like writing their little notes. So I thought that was kind of fun. So it was a good summary. But yeah, I thought it went really well. I was really happy with it, and I was excited to be part of something like this. And it was nice seeing, like, especially like all of the like the higher admin at UVic, like even like Kevin Hall, like talking like I thought his speech was very well done as well. And it was just nice seeing like everyone come together on the topic of students. So I really enjoyed that.
Mm, amazing. Was there anything that sort of popped up or was a theme that arose in your group that you were anticipating or that surprised you? Is there anything that was like that people kept coming back to as a topic or an idea?
Well, we came up with this idea of like a code of conduct of behavior almost, and it surprised me because they were talking a lot about like within Senate meetings themselves. So the group was talking about like keeping decorum in a way that is going to encourage people to bring up new ideas rather than making it kind of a intense. Like when people like there has been Senate meetings where it has been like a bit more on the tense side because people are so this is like their passion projects for a lot of people. So the group was saying that we wanted to make it more of like a supportive environment, like asking questions and like a like let's try to get better way rather than like this is my opinion kind of way. And that seemed like a really like common consensus within the group. So it was like a kind of just like how to be a good person kind of thing. Because like one of the senators, his wife was an elementary school teacher, and he said that at the end of the meeting, he was like, "This is how my wife tells her grade one kids to act." And I thought it was just a good way to like come back to the basics and like promote collaboration in a positive way.
Emily, and you sit on Senate, right? You're one of the
Yeah.
student senators. Do you see bad behavior? Did you have that framed and named for you before?
Um, maybe not with nothing personal with me. I'd never been a part of any kind of admin before, so I don't know what the standard is. Um, I've noticed that things can get kind of intense, but I don't think anyone's ever been like targeted in a certain way, but I do think there has been times where we probably could have framed things a bit um nicer. But I don't know if that's just me not being used to this environment, but yeah, there has been some pretty interesting moments.
Yeah, it's weird coming into to a Senate and being like, oh, I guess is this the way everybody talks to each other? And then having those conversations bubble up in your working group that points out sometimes that that behavior is probably not civil or kind. And then what does it look like to create an intervention that can make it kinder and more humane? Um, yeah, I loved that. I loved your table for that. What do we ask our grade twos to do that we're not willing to do ourselves in those gathering spaces, I think was a really clear thread that then bubbled up in other tables and other conversations too. Yeah. Thanks, Emily. Who would like to go next about what surprised you? What did you learn? What bubbled up? What's percolating? Justin, go for it.
Yeah, actually at my table I had probably some of the more like stronger communicators I think at Zen meetings. One of them was the is the AVP for Student Affairs at UVic. So definitely, like if we're talking about student flourishing, I mean, not only is he sort of the person that really receives it, but he's also the face of it. So I think that there were a couple of moments, and I think it just because the the faculty members that I had are quite strong communicators at my table. There were times that it did feel a little bit tense and a little bit pointed towards the one executive member that we had at our table. Um, and so I think that one of the themes that really came up was that at our table we had senators, we had board members. A lot of people at our table actually are UVic alum. And so it was a lot of people were drawing comparisons to how UVic was, not even just pre-COVID, but also like in the late 90s. And so for myself as a facilitator, I didn't exactly know how to navigate around that because not only am I like, not only did I have like the least amount of professional qualification at the table, I wasn't around in the 90s. So it was, I think that was definitely like one of the weaker points. Thinking about the facilitation was just that like these very, very unexpected moments. There were some moments where it got kind of off topic and I sort of knew how to guide us back, but sometimes the conversation would very much like derail or sometimes devolve into a little bit of tension. But otherwise, I think that our table really brought up two really like I think like textbook points when we're thinking about the book. Um, First, it was sort of like this for lack of a better term, like this reconciliation between the Senate and the Board of Governors. I think that we recognize that there was definitely like some points where um like we aren't on the same or like, we don't see each other's paths. And so to have sort of that open discussion to sort of openly admit that the Senate and the board, even though we trust each other to support each other, to support the university, we don't actually know what the other one is doing. I think that really broke the ice a lot and definitely like broke the tension. Um, and also an emphasis on student flourishing. I think we talked a lot about like extracurricular. Um, events that students are doing, like the clubs. Our table shared the robotics club. That's or the F1 car race that goes around Ring Road at the university. I talked about my involvement on here as well. This is my second term on Senate, as well as just my involvement in my course union. So definitely like student flourishing, and the relationship between Senate and board was definitely brought up. But again, it was a lot of, I think there were definitely some like personal feelings about the university, and like Emily said, it was definitely like their passion project. Like they're only expressing this frustration because they care so much about this community. That I guess for me it was just not unfortunate, but it just happened to be by chance that I got the AVP student affairs at my table.
It's so interesting that the power dynamics are quite different, right? Around that table, and that sometimes it's really useful to know where those power dynamics are in an ecosystem, and sometimes it's really nice for you to not be so aware that you manage the space because of them, right? So that's that balance of like, and Emily, I like take your point about who's facilitating and who's note taking, and the deans are in positions of titled authority, right? And we didn't facilitate with them in the same kinds of ways as we did with the facilitators. So these really interesting power dynamics that it sounds like Justin and Emily, you both did great jobs of surfacing and of naming them, right? You don't have to resolve them. Just be like, oh, there's one administrator, then there's some board members, then there's some senators, then there's some students, and how that can be a point of tension, but that tension can also be the way through it, right? It is the opening to openly admit that you don't know what the other is doing, and what does it look like to sit in that acknowledgement and the discomfort of that, and then how do you go forward from there? So I think that's really cool. That the where the tension is where the attentiveness to build something different lives. Yeah, cool. Kate, what were you thinking in terms of coming in? We've heard from Emily and Justin as students. How did it feel to come in as a staff member and facilitate this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the power dynamic actually is probably more similar to Emily and Justin. Like the same, I had the same comment. Like the dean that was reporting was great, did a great job, but also like clearly had the items that they were passionate about and kind of only reported on those and didn't report on a lot of other things that were talked about at the table. So um I thought that, I don't think it was intentional or anything. I think just those are the things that floated to the surface. My table was a bit different, I think, because my table actually didn't show up. And then at the last minute after the lunch, I got moved to a different table. So we kind of missed that first lunch, casual conversation, kind of building some psychological safety. And like, so I felt like our conversation maybe didn't get as deep as it could have if we had the extra hour, but it was okay. I think we had a good conversation. Um, I kind of I didn't use the questions like verbatim off the sheet, but I ended up kind of covering similar topics. I kind of tried to do it more naturally, I think, because also we'd missed that sort of initial more informal. So I was kind of trying to do a blend of kind of pick it up in the moment. I had my table was also very tangible thinkers. Like they really wanted to think very specifically about Senate in particular. So I felt like the board member, I kind of had to try and keep bringing the board in with the board member because everybody wanted to get into the nitty gritty of Senate. And I was trying, so I was asking kind of more questions about student flourishing and trying to bring people back to like that concept. But it was I found it very challenging. So I don't know that we really got there. The big takeaway from my group was that they really just wanted the structure of the Senate meetings to change so that we weren't like rubber stamping or seeing stuff when it's already coming complete. They just really wanted like, which I think we've actually been doing lately is having more items for discussion and feedback so that they can be kind of honed and then brought back for approvals, which I think was a good point and a good strategy and yeah, it was I think hopefully is kind of the direction we're going in. But I kind of felt a bit disappointed that we didn't get into some more bigger picture ideas from the book. Yeah.
It's so interesting that the how important that informal lunch is to creating
Yeah.
that psychological safety. What does psychological safety look like in having and it often is treated in many gatherings as just like a not the essential thing, right? We got to get down to business is the
Yeah.
focus, but in fact, to get down to real business, you've got to spend the time building relationships. So I think that's a
Yeah.
really good point.
I think we could have had more of that ideological, bigger, kind of broader discussion, and then we then gotten it. Like we would have had two parts kind of there.
Yeah.
Whereas we kind of had to mush it together a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
But I think it was still like a high quality conversation. I think it was still great. Like I felt prepared and that was great.
Good, good. And can you give me an example of the difference between what the dean was recording and what the conversations were that were interesting that didn't get recorded? Like what was
Well, like there was like we talked about like the representation at Senate, how it's like quite faculty heavy, and if we're talking about, you know, student flourishing, then, you know, maybe the students have to have an equal number, or, you know, there needs to be a little bit more diversity of representation because right now it's, you know, I don't know if more like it's 2/3 faculty and deans probably, if that's fair. So I think sometimes we get wrapped up in fairly academic faculty related concerns rather than thinking about student concerns, for example.
yeah, I like that. And just even saying, what is the through line from this, right? Like what governance to student flourishing includes Senate in there, in that
Yeah.
entanglement, and where and how are we co-create, who owns the academic enterprise, right? And then who's engaged and invited into the decisions and the dreaming around building and maintaining or reimagining the academic enterprise.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, conceptually, we're kind of talking about, you know, the traditional style and how that academic enterprise has definitely been, you know, quite colonial and, um, you know, not advantageous to equity seeking groups. But, you know, if we don't change the representation there, then how are we supposed to make progress on that, right?
And was there an openness around the table to do that work, or was there a few people who were enthusiastic and a few people were like, "Don't change the content"?
Oh yeah, yeah, no. I mean, the faculty definitely like their representation the way it is. So, and then they're the ones who have the power and the votes, right? So,
Yeah.
how do you change that?
Yeah. I found it fascinating too, Kate, that the most of the conversations that bubbled up in the collective sense making were about Senate, right? And
Yeah,
there was
it's
nothing
heavy
about the
Senate.
board.
Yeah,
It was really Senate heavy, and the board members were like, "Yes, Senate needs to be better." And I'm like, and then but senators were also like, "Senators need to be, Senate needs to be better." But I was curious because there was not a lot of conversation about how the board could reimagine how it governs, how it gathers, how it imagines itself in relationship. So I think that's a really interesting point. Like, what does a follow-up look like about the board? Yeah, Emily.
That just reminded me of one of the other things that we talked about. It was like what it was interesting what Kate said about the dynamic of at her table because at my table, the one board member, she was awesome. She was she's involved with finance or something, but she was super receptive to like everything that we were saying and had some great ideas. And I think that one of the things that we talked a lot about was the relationship between the board and Senate. It just maybe we didn't convey it when we were reporting out, but um, they were saying this idea of like trust between the two institutions that like if we because I personally don't really know the difference and I said that I was like does anyone really know like the difference between the board and senate and then they were like oh yes of course and I was like okay awesome but um then we started talking about like how the like if the board brings something together or the senate does or people who are like say senators put forward like Justin was saying, like this whole passion project that we trust that the work has been done, like in a certain way, but right now maybe that isn't the case because like it is true, like when we're at Senate, we do have the discussion items and there's a lot of good conversation there, but there's also a lot of like, well, what about this, and then the person's like, well, I've talked about this in the whole report or something like that. So they were bringing up this idea of like there's a bit of distrust between the people who are putting stuff forward or the board and the Senate in general, and that's sometimes what could bring up a bit of the tension if people are like, well, did you check this? And the person's like, actually, I did. Did you read my 30-page report kind of thing? So that's what they were also bringing up. But
Well, that's very cool. Okay, so it's not just Senate, but the relationship between Senate and board, and even like Senate committees that do all the work that take it to Senate. Where and how are we communicating? Well, and the board, board has their own working groups. So how do we create those spaces of transparency, of trust, of communication that people have done their due diligence? And where and how are we using our time in the best possible way? Yeah, love that. Emily, thank you for that. Maureen, what did you think as a facilitator participant sitting in community around a circle? What struck you and what are you still thinking about?
Mhm. Well, I had lots of things struck me. One of the things that I realized in the moment was that I probably should not have been both facilitator and organizer because I was like, where's the microphone? And have we like who's got this lunch? And I wasn't able to actually be at the table and working through that, like establishing that safety piece. Luckily I had a group that was just like, we're good, don't worry about it. And they just kind of managed to do that themselves. So that was good, but lesson learned that I should just be at the table. All of our facilitators should just be able to be there. In terms of like the prep, I thought us having something like having the book that grounded everybody in sort of a foundation, understanding what the deal was when they walked in. I thought that was really, really, really helpful. And the number of people that came up and were like, can I keep the book? I think this is so good. Like, I'm so excited to keep reading it. I read those chapters, but I want to keep going. Like getting that kind of feedback, I think was really, really positive. I think people came in with an excitement and with an eagerness to get into the concepts and to lean into the conversation. And I found that that's at my table that like people were dialed in, they were really engaged, they were eager, and they were like full of ideas. And so I think having that sort of background to get people prepped and ready to go really showed up in a good way, uh, at least especially for my table. I similar, as people were reporting out, I was like, oh, that's about Senate and that's about Senate and that's what and I found at my table, it was very much like the senators were like, we want to know more about board, we want to spend more time together, we want to be able to get into topics together. Um, so the conversation at our table, and I think even our report out was a little bit less sort of the joint aspect of it, but the conversation was definitely around like these two groups are really important and we need to understand each other and we need to, if we're both going to be asked to make a decision about something, we could have a joint consultation session rather than it goes to Senate and then it goes to board. So that was definitely something that came through. The other thing I thought in terms of like the prep, again, like I didn't go through it was really nice to have the list at the table, but we didn't go through it sort of like in order, or I didn't ask the questions exactly like that. We just kind of, and I think especially because people were so eager, they didn't need a lot of prompts. They sort of were running with things. And sort of towards the end when when things were starting to sort of like lighten a little bit, I just had to look over like, is there something that I can use here? And it was like, we've covered it all. Everything that we thought we should try to pull out of people, we've covered it. We just didn't go in order or use those words kind of thing. Yeah, so that was good. The other thing I'll just comment on a little bit of the feedback here around like um the sort of like senators need to be better, but board and even the board is like, yeah, you guys go on. Um, I think just, the size of our board is it's a third, less than a third of the size of Senate. And so and the folks around the table have been together for a couple of years, and we've had lots of opportunities to eat together, to get to know each other, to do strategic thinking together. So they've had a bit of that opportunity to build that cohesion. And it's just so much more difficult on the Senate side because of the size, because of the turnover. We have like a third of Senate members turnover every year. So that's sort of the perpetual challenge with that structure. And just why it shows up differently when board members are like, no, we think we're okay. And then, and you guys need to check yourself. So maybe that's a little bit of why there was some discrepancy in how folks were making their comments. Yeah.
And I do think that there's been lots of intentional board engagement, board education, board, and there are more opportunities for the board to get together and have bigger conversations in a way that Senates across Canada don't engage in a lot of collective sense making. They are in the rubber stamping in ways that there's not a ton of professional development, elevating their thinking as in governance. So that by the nature of the body and by the nature of the size, there's more probably work to be done, preliminary gathering, thoughtful, intentional work at the Senate level. And in many ways, the board is okay. Like the board's the board's working.
Yeah.
And earnestly pushing things, pulling things, steering things forward where the Senate feels like it's a little bit more intractable, difficult, fraught, and dysfunctional. I think that is that's not a UVic thing, that is across the sector thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. What else struck you from this the sitting together? I'm really interested in the disposition of the people at the table. Was it mixed up enough? Could we have mixed it some more? Were the groups too big or too small? Were they just right? I know, Kate, that you lost your group and had to go and join a different group, but the dimensions, Justin, you mentioned tension coming, but being able to work through it into other kinds of spaces. Do you feel like the objective that we set for ourselves, which is people left the room more attuned to and respecting the value of different humans in different governing spaces? Do you think we got there? Do you think what else could we do or design better for that objective?
I think that that the reason why we had all this tension was just because the tables were so diverse. I really enjoyed the kind of the composition of the different group members. So like, myself as just a lowly undergrad, but we also had faculty members, the dean, the executive. Like that was like just even on like on a personal level, I felt it was just a super cool experience that I was able to facilitate all of that. And I think that by the end, and especially I think after hearing all the other tables, I think that really like invigorated our group to sort of to um just to remind ourselves that our one table, thankfully, is not the only table that gets to share its opinion. But really, like we're all a part. Like every single table is just a different group of people that are working towards the same goal. So definitely, like the sharing out definitely like invigorated our group. And I think that by the end of it, that we all sort of left with the sense of okay, yeah, this is. I think it definitely like renewed the motivation um to for why almost all of us sit on Senate, and it's for student flourishing and to improve the student experience.
Yeah, I heard that from some reporting back in different groups that each one of the groups expressed differently the need for us to be in radical humanization, right? That we needed to move from monolith the us versus them into spaces where we could talk civilly, respectfully, center the human, have the time necessary to do that kind of work. Morag, that was your group too, right? When Hoku and was it Ben, who was like, we need to gather more and just like see each other as humans, right? There seemed to be a recurring feeling that we need to do that work before we need to do the like how to be in community work before we do the how to like change the structures work, or we do need to do that at the same time, and we're doing one more than another. Yeah. Kate, how are you feeling? I see you sort of thinking through that. What did you think about? Do you think we got closer to the lofty aspiration that we set for ourselves, which is to see each other as valuable, three-dimensional humans?
Yeah, my table definitely expressed some of that for sure. We didn't have a student at our table, so I think that would have been, I think that was a little bit of a loss for our table. But we did have Carrie, so there was like an interesting governance side, I think, like some extra additional knowledge there that we wouldn't have had at another table. And the board member was very active, so I think the diversity was good. And keep in mind, I had two tables smushed together, so the planning, the planned diversity probably didn't really happen the way it should have.
Yeah, and sometimes it's accidental, right? Sometimes you're like, I'm gonna mix all these people in and see what
Yeah,
happens.
yeah. But I
And
think the way it was planned was perfect. Yeah.
yeah. And you know what it struck me is I didn't see this concept in my keynote, which I should have, which is that equity is excellence and that a diverse group performs way better
Yeah.
as long as we create belonging and mattering. And when I said that, everybody was like, oh, that's maybe I should have led with that one, right? This, why are you in groups together that are so different? And how important it is to have things like the informal lunch to do the belonging and mattering piece, right? That those things have to be done. Even though we sort of throw away the social or throw away the like, oh, let's get down to business. That's the business. Yeah. I love that.
And that diversity of thought. Like I think my table had, we didn't like professionally or role wise, we didn't have as much diversity, I think. So there was a lot of agreement, which isn't always good. Like a little tension is actually great for these kinds of things, right?
And I like that idea of like there was a loss because you didn't have a student. It would be really interesting to just make sure that there was
Oh, actually, we did have a student, but we had a graduate student.
okay.
Um, yeah, so not quite. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
A side insight that it sort of flew by me and it showed up in two groups that I sat with, but then I didn't see it in the collective sense making emerge is how there are a lot of students on Senate compared to other Senates. There's a lot of students on Senate, but the students don't know each other, right? That they don't meet, they don't are connecting, they're not
They're not all as engaged as
no,
fine examples here.
yeah. Yeah, so some of them hadn't met each other or hadn't like had a conversation with one another. So that is something that a few groups were like, we should like get the Senate together and or get the student senators together and do a couple of little workshops and like, and Emily, to your point, what's the difference between board and Senate? Like, how do we get that shared vocabulary in with students who are often coming on for one term? Like, thank goodness, Justin, you're in your second term. So you're like, okay, I kind of get this now and this makes sense. But like, what's the onboarding and what's the creating a kind of community of practice for students so that they understand how powerful their voices are and how they can contribute to illuminate some of the blind spots that we might have more senior or closer to systems and centers of power. Emily, yeah.
I appreciate you bringing up this point. I think personally, like, this is my first term being on Senate, and I feel like I'm actually pretty well acquainted with the other student senators. Like when we are at Senate meetings, like I've like obviously I've met Justin a few times in person, but I think it's like when you're in Senate meetings, it actually we have sat together the last couple ones, and he just texted me in chat being like, come sit with us. So it's like people are like student senators is like a good group to be a part of. But something I really appreciated that you did, Jessica, was not address us, the facilitators, as student senators, because you just addressed us as we are senators. And I feel like that's often lost a lot at UVic because I there is the power dynamic of like being a student versus a dean reporter. And I think by always putting the word student first, it kind of demeans our position a little bit because I campaigned, I ran, I was elected. A lot of people on Senate weren't, they were acclaimed. And I had a whole, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm just saying that like I had a whole campaign and it is nice hearing like you're a senator and it's not just like, oh, this is a student like position that you're filling because it's a university, it's like built on students and that's how the whole point of the meeting was student flourishing kind of. So that's kind of one of the most important voices to be heard at the Senate. Justin.
I also like wanted to mention during the lunch, I talked with a couple of faculty members, some of them who have been on Senate for a long time, who commented on the fact that there weren't very many students that were present at um, at the um, the retreat. Um, and it kind of got me thinking about student involvement on Senate and kind of launched because I have no finals. It launched me to like a rabbit hole of trying to figure out like what has been happening, what are the trends, what has been going on at other universities. So yeah, I was able to find a couple of numbers that showed that like for us, like for UVic, student engagement on Senate last term was actually quite low. And so I think that they're definitely like their faculty members are definitely aware. And yeah, there are 16 positions on Senate. For the last three complete Senate terms, we've had a vacancy for every single month. So that's definitely noticed. It's being pointed out. Um, and yeah, like Emily said, it's mm, a student senator vote counts the exact same as the president's vote, for example, if he has to break a tie. So I think, yeah, like if we're like to emphasize student flourishing definitely means that we need to get students to understand what exactly Senate does, why it's a good idea for them to understand what we do, and to get them involved if that's something that they feel drawn to.
Yeah.
I love this point. Like part of me thinks like that is a big piece to fixing a lot of things. Like if we get the representation right, if we get the voice like healthy and strong and the power dynamic settled, that will actually solve a lot of problems just by virtue of that, right? Like we have to have the right people in the room at the right mix and feeling safe and being able to express themselves like well, right?
And I was just gonna jump in and say, like, as you pointed out, like there's Senate is weighted more heavily towards people who are not students. And so when you only, I mean, 16 is a lot for Senates across country, but when you only have 16 out of 72 and you have a vacancy and you have folks that don't understand or don't feel like they might see themselves as, I'm just the student. I don't feel welcomed and belonged. So that I belong. So for my office, like we're super interested in being able to find out from the student's perspective, how do we help people understand the opportunity? There's 21,000 students and we have 14 who go to Senate. So how do we get more people aware, interested, understanding what the role could be, what it could look like, what they could get themselves involved in? And then if they've signed up, how do we get them to the meetings, understanding how to participate, knowing that they can express their voice, and that exact thing about when you're showing up, when we have the representation as to the level that we want it to be, that's when we're gonna be able to use the structure that we're given, that we've inherited, in the best way that we can. So those are all very I'm very keen to go up with you guys on how to do that better.
Well, and it's one of the reasons why I wrote Hope Circuits is because I work with so many student leaders and student senators and student board members. And I was like, all right, here's like, where do we have a very radical welcome, informal, funny, playful, where we can make the case that this is something that they can see themselves in, they're invited into, and that they can have that language. It's not mystifying and opaque. You can grab that language and those structures, grasp them pretty fast, and then be able to say, okay, how do we elevate our thinking? And, I think Morag, your point about, where do we invite in and emphasize the importance of Senate is also like, that's not just a student engagement thing. That's a faculty engagement thing where faculty do not understand some pretty fundamentals. I actually was just in Senate, Friday, and I had to say to my colleagues, you have a capacity to govern. You don't have a capacity to represent. Don't put your like social sciences hat on and yell at people about resource allocation models. Your entire job is the stewardship and sustainability of this organization, and you're making decisions on the best interest of this organization as a whole, that it will continue in perpetuity. And they're like, they didn't know that. There's senior people who've been on Senate, Justin, for years, and they're just like, well, no, we need to make this decision about finances. I'm like, no, you need to make decisions about the academic enterprise. The board needs to make decisions about budget. We need to be informed, careful, candid, clear-eyed, but we're not making financial decisions. We're making decisions based on the academic enterprise. And they were gobsmacked, and they're like, oh, okay, well, that might change my vote. Can we put that off until the next meeting? And I'm like, yeah, because how we go into these spaces, often, if you're having to fill a vacancy of a student every month, you're not onboarding them, as a group, as a cohort. They're not sharing the same information or the same experience. And so there are gaps all the time in the knowledge of, okay, what's our role? What's our lane? How do we stay in our lane? How do we do the best possible job in this space that will fulfill our fiduciary duty, which is the long-term sustainability of this institution, organization, community? And I think that if we can figure that out, I think, Morag, you're right. Then we can figure out the Kate's insights, which is, where does voice matter? Where does representation matter? Where does the real change happen? Where do we go from rubber stamping to meaningful stewardship of this complex organization into spaces where people flourish? Like, then we figure it out. And I think y'all created the spaces and seeded those conversations in your working groups where maybe just saying that out loud, maybe that's enough for the 3 people who didn't hear that out loud ever. Or maybe it's enough that one of the student senators who'd never met anybody, she's in her 5th year, she's going to med school, she sat in the middle table, I'm blanking on her name, where she hadn't met anybody before. Maybe that was enough that she was like, oh, wow, there are humans in the world. There's Justin, and there's Emily, and there's Sonia, and like, wow, those encounters have longer term repercussions we can't survey, we can't get data from, but those are like the tiny butterfly effects that can have real and profound change. Our challenge, right, is how to capture, and this is Morag's challenge with Carrie, is like, okay, we got some momentum. We left feeling like there was opportunity for radical humanization and for reimagining structures. What does it look like now? What does the organization need to do to maintain that momentum where that hope comes up and can be used in future facing spaces? And Morag, maybe that's a conversation you and Carrie and I have with Kevin and Christina and like whomever needs to be in the room for that. But that palpable energy we can lose and stall if we don't have a yes and, right? Like so that's where I'm sort of sitting right now in the board report, the board report that will go to Morag, and then you can figure out how and where it might get pulled in. But it is such a rich set of conversations. And so I'm finding it actually hard to condense it and give you some takeaways, because from the collective sense making, the notes that I took, the notes that everybody took in their Google Docs, the insights that we've had in our facilitation training, it's really rich stuff. But we also need to be able to be like, okay, how is it coherent? And then what parts of it need to be shared with which constituents? So I'm sitting there with, and I think we've got a couple of parts. We've got like, what did we, I'm just going to pull it up for y'all. Just to see if I'm missing anything. Let me see if I can get a very quick, I know we only have 6 minutes, but I just want to give you a quick look at what we've got so far. And then if there's anything missing, please tell me as we go through this. It's like 26 pages right now, and which is too long. I promise I won't give you, or I'll give it just for you, and we'll condense it for a wider audience. You're all very welcome to it. But what did we hope to achieve? What did we do? What did we learn? And then what those emerging themes were, and then what the takeaways or actions were. So that's what we're working on. And then we have the appendix. So like, what did the agenda look like? What did the facilitation training look like? What were some of the glossary? I think one of the interesting things that struck me is I could have gone in and said, all right, folks, we're going to spend 15 minutes. I'm going to give you a PowerPoint slide. I'm going to tell you what bicameral governance is. I'm going to tell you what fiduciary is. I'm going to tell you what, a policy is different than a procedure, is different than a process or a practice. But we didn't. We gave them the invitation to read a chapter, but in conversation, they got to co-create what those things meant. And because they got to co-create what they meant together as a group, they got to own it. And then they got to hear each other say it out loud, which was way more interesting and way more powerful than me being like, all right, here are the answers. They got to sit, listen, rumble, and then those definitions emerge through conversation. And you can really see them in those Google Docs, in that note taking, where people were like really trying to sort of tease out the nuances of like, what do we mean by student flourishing? What do we mean by student experience? What do we mean by, Senate and decision-making bodies? And so that I thought was really, I can see that from all of the different kinds of notes and things, that they owned it, and then they heard each other say it out loud. And then they walked out of the room hearing not my voice or not the handbook of good governance, which like not super interesting to read, but they got to hear each other sense make. And that struck me as important. Yeah. So in terms of this report, what did we hope to achieve? What did we do? What did we learn? And what those emerging themes are. I'm just kind of pulling them together and trying to make it without diluting it or sort of taking some of those edges out, try to capture some of those good conversations. But if there's anything that you want me to look at or add or include, please, I'm open to all your guidance. Or if you want to think about it and then shoot me an email, I'm happy to send the first draft to you, Morag, too, and just be like, all right, this is what I got. What's useful? What's not useful? And what audiences? What should we send to Senate? What should we send to Kevin? What should we send to the participants? So maybe I'll let you do that. Anything strike you? I don't know why the algorithm has just put my hand up. Keep talking like this. I keep going like this, and then it gives me a thumbs up, and I'm like, stop, Zoom, stop reading my body language. But if there's anything you'd like to see in the report, or if you'd like to send us a testimonial or a reflection about the experience of doing that facilitation, that would be amazing. And so maybe what Sophia will do is, in terms of next steps, what I'll do, Morag, is probably send you the rough rough draft just for you, your eyes only, super confidential. Like, here's the rough shape, and you can be like, yes, yes, no, more of this, cut this. And then I can, in the new year, play with it a little bit more. But then if we can, Sophia, send a message to this group and just say, any reflections on the experience of facilitation, both in the training lead up and then during, and what is on your mind, that would be super helpful for us too. And we can capture, anonymize, make that confidential, but also just useful for our practices. And yeah, because it's iterative, right? We're always learning how to do this better. Amazing. Right. 2 minutes. Any last thoughts, ideas, things, curiosities, queries? Yep, More.
I just want to say thank you again to the folks who volunteered, because I think Justin was the one who said, like, being prepared, and or it was Ivan, like, let's not identify someone here at the table. Let's prepare people to go in. But that meant that you put yourselves out there, and you committed to the training, and you committed to showing up and doing that work, and managing that tension that, like, we expected would show up in some places. So thank you so much. This, I think, was a huge success, and it really is the work of the people that are on this call that did it. So thank you a lot.
Yes, and I'm going to send everybody a certificate of completion. So you've gone through facilitator training for the Hope Institute, the Hope Circuits Institute. So I don't know if that's useful for your CVs as students, CVs in professional development, Kate as a staff member. But if there's anything you ever need from me too, if you need a testimonial, a reference letter, or any of that, we'll send you a certificate of completion for facilitation. And if you want to put it on your resumes, please do. And yeah, because it is remarkable, as Morag said, like, you committed to doing something that was hard and difficult, and you could have just showed up as a participant, and you showed up and did the work, and I think it made all the difference in the world. So
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you. And Morag, it's a great job. Great job organizing. Thank you.
yeah, it was my favorite thing all fall. It was the thing I was looking forward to the most, and I loved it. I love spending that time with you all. So thank you. Yeah, and I hope this is not our last conversation. I hope we continue to build on what do iterative loops look like? What do hope circuits look like? So yeah, we will be in contact. We will show up in your inbox very soon. Amazing. All right, and have wonderful holidays. Happy winter solstice. Happy Christmas. Happy all of the things. Yeah, I hope you all get some rest, and also a good party or two.
Thanks so much. Bye, guys.